their supporters. As the military clamps down on ordinary Ugandans, desperate for a political voice and a choice for change, you have been warned of the bloody consequences. Silence translates into complicity in the vote rigging and the brutalization of opposition on the continent, as it did with the Tanzanian elections. Such silence only trenches and fuels dictatorships and the decline in democracy. His Excellency Ian Khama, former president of Botswana. Thank you very much, President Khama, for not choosing silence at this profound moment in history. Now, I like this. Of course, ngenda kubayitiramuko, article. Naye, mwena mukyajjukira ekyali Tanzania. You remember the elections in Tanzania, byonna ebyaliyo. Obadde okimanyi nti nno waliyo abakulembeze ba Africa abaatendinga inauguration ya Samia Suluhu. You remember very well, right? Among those was this guy, HH, of Zambia, President Hakainde Hichilema. Oyo President Hakainde Hichilema, wali oyinza muteeka mu tuluba lirimu ne regime yaabwe okuli Nelson Chamisa lwakuba owezimbabwe lwakuba naye tali active nnyo. Hakainde Hichilema, His Excellency Bobi Wine, Asonko is it Senegal? Waliwo regime awo foundations ezimu wano on the African continent abakulembeze ze bapikingayo ne batandika okubeera nga babangula mu leadership skills ezenjawulo. Newuunya, of course Hakainde Hichilema yali part of that group. Newuunya nga Hakainde Hichilema attendinze inauguration ya Samia Suluhu. Lwakuba ekirungi era we yamala ojja attendinga naddayo Zambia bamukuba amayinja nga ina olukungaano olumu yali agenzeeko. Abantu be Zambia bamukuba amayinja ku podium ne bamukuba amayinja ne bamulemesa okwogera byayagala okwogera dedde nga amaze okuva e Tanzania. So legitimacy abakulembeze bano on the African continent, legitimacy gye bawa dictatorial governments kati ngeya Samia Suluhu Tanzania, ngeya wano mu Uganda, man zibadhimbisa ne baberanga bakola ebikolobero nga balowooza nti ati wali nomwayinza kunkwatako. So legitimacy gye bawa Samia Suluhu yekozesa Museveni byolabakola, ye mukozesa bino byonna ebyokudeployinga amagye, ebyokudeployinga abantu ku ma street, video nga zino kati just look at that. Amagye gali ku street gagenda babukuye bantu migabata. Oyo bamusanza ayambadde t-shirt ya red, kyekiri kyenkugambye. Yes, red ekubisa emiggo nga bwolengera ku screen yawo. So legitimacy mwalabye African Union. You guys saw a document from the African Union congratulating the dictator Muwonge Rafferino Uganda. So painful. But we all know, even actually the East African community, neri etwaliramu resiliency IGAD and all that kind of thing. Now, njagala okujjukiza nti before elections, that was on the 14th, His Excellency Kyagulanyi mwabatali online, just nkujjukizamu katono. His Excellency Kyagulanyi aina interview oba aina abakulembeze abamukyalira ewaka abenjawulo, aba African Union, aba European Union, naye abasomera. Yes, yabasomera n'abagamba mmwe basajja mmwe ne bakazi mmwe mujja wano nga obalengerawo. Yes, yabasomera bubi nnyo mu interview eno nagibaterayo mwagiraba. Naye yabasomera n'abagamba mujja wano nga akalulu kagenda mu maaso, ne mwebuzavinga bujwanga yenna akolebwa mu kalulu, ne mu documenting ebintu namu bye mulabirako ddala nti bya kisiru tebisobola kulegitimizinga bukulembeze bwa muntu, ne muddeeri ne mugamba mbwa akalulu kadde free and fair. Ekintu ekyo yakibagamba maaso ku maaso. Bajjo mukyalirako ewuwe wali emagere. baba nonga batuuka oyinza ogajje byo bijja biyogera nze saagala balimba era kyobalabanga mbeera njagala nnyo ne mbaleetera information gye nnyinako obukakafu baabo abaaliwo wano on the 15th on the 14th lwakuba nti internet yali evuddeko nali live wano nga mbalaga buli kimu ekyaliwo naye yabasomera n'abagamba nti nno mujja wano nga mubuuzuumya obusaati ne mwefuula ba election observers ne mu identifyinga irregularities mpitirivu nnyo mu kalulu then olumala ne mugenda ne mugamba nti akalu kadde free and fair. I liked that. Anyway, fena tukimanyi nti African Union is just a bunch of useless leaders that deserve no attention. Actually, it just needs to be abolished. Yes. Twetagisa organizations nga the Alliance of Sahel States. Erimu Mali, erimu Burkina Faso, erimu ensi ezo ezekutula ku ECOWAS ne bagamba nti mwe ECOWAS muli ba puppets ba France. Tetugenda kuddamu kubeera nammwe. Sizo coalitions zetwetaaga nga tusobola okwekolera ssente ezaffe. Ennyonyi ya Nigeria yagwako mu Burkina Faso Traore n'agikwata. Anyway, that will be a story for another day. Saagala ku exploding ate kugenda beyond ensonga enkulu eyandeese. Naye ngeyo naye tujja tutuukangayokko tugendeko beyond Uganda, Southern Africa, Western Africa, North Africa as well as East Africa. So that, because at the end of the day, however much we are in Uganda, but we are Africans, and what affects Africa affects Uganda as well. So olina okubeera nga n'ebifa wabweru wa Uganda nabyo obitegeera bulungi nnyo. Kankutwale mu article eno kanjikutwalemuko. Desperate for a voice in Uganda. Sooke mbalage ki? Tuyitemu mu article oba nsooke mbalage Abannakenya. Naye si mpanvu nnyo tugende. Ian Khama yakugambye nti yet desperate for a voice in Uganda, democracy has not lived up to its promise. Yet as the military clamps down on ordinary Ugandans, desperate for... Subire mulaba bannange, should I do like this? All right, I believe that's far much better, right? Yeah, that's far much better. That's far much better. Yet, as the military clamps down on ordinary Ugandans, desperate for a political voice and a choice for change, in the wake of an election that followed a typical authoritarian playbook, democracy still has an inestimable value. Yeah, inestimable value. Value tasobola kola ki? Estimating ono bamuyita Serese Khama Ian. Ennaku z'omwezi 18 ozira bulungi January 2026 article eno yabadde ya lunaku lwaggulo. Now, the site on social media of young Ugandans honestly measuring out and marking the 20 million election observers had to remain from their voting station in the bustling low-income neighboring of Chibuye in Kampala speaks to the different value Africans place in democracy. Instead of a free choice, in the wake of the election on 15 January, Ugandans have reportedly received from the regime the mass arrest of opposition supporters, torture, the military invasion of the home of the main opposition candidate, and an internet shutdown. Yes, at least for you guys abali mu Uganda, byonna mubimanyi bulungi nti instead of a free choice in the wake of the election on 15 January, Ugandans have reportedly received from the regime the mass arrest of opposition supporters, torture, the military invasion of the home of main opposition candidate, and an internet shutdown. In so doing, this explains precisely why more than 2/3 of Africans routinely polled prefer democracy to the alternative. In Uganda, the number is more than 80%. Now, the reason for this is obvious. Whereas democracy is viewed as a given in some parts of the world, for most Africans, it remains an ambition. Freedom House calculates that 93% of Africans today live in authoritarian states. Katonda wange. Freedom House calculates that 93% of Africans today live in authoritarian states. Kyekiri kyenkugambye nti what affects Uganda affects Africa as well. Lwaki? You've seen, you guys, let me actually even pause a bit. You've seen how Museveni successfully exported his authoritarian leadership style to Tanzania. You've seen how he has managed to export it to Kenya. You see what's currently going on in Kenya, to the point that Kenyans can be abducted in Uganda and Ruto pretends to know nothing, however much bamubulidde bibadde bigenda maaso. N'atavaayo yadde kubeerako na kyayogera. Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyo testified upon being dumped at Busia border after spending 38 days in Communicado. They testified before Kenyan TV stations that while in detention in Uganda, baategezebwako nti ab'amagye abaali bakuba abantu e Kenya during those protests ezaali mu Kenya eza financial bill bamu baali bana Uganda. Now, for Ugandan soldiers to take part in silencing dissenting voices in Kenya, it doesn't come by mistake. Wabeerawo an agreement ebeera ekoleddwa abakulembeze. Kiba kitegeeza mubeera muyina enzikiriziganya zammwe nti okay, tukole kino. Mulaba Ruto ya congratulating Zedda Museveni. Buli kimu ekyabaddewo nga wakirabye. Ye Ruto ya mu congratulating Zedda. Ekiri Tanzania kyo siina kikubuulira. Wakyerabirako n'amaaso, nange wannajja n'embikola ki? Nange wannajja n'embikunyumiza n'obitegeera bulungi nnyo. Tegeera bulungi. So, President guno nakugamba nti no, the Uganda election offered a choice between two vastly different futures. One represented continuity in the form of the 81-year-old incumbent Yoweri Museveni, who seized power 40 years ago. You need to correct this, not 80-year-old. The guy is around 90 to 93. Yeah, just go and watch the recent interview the guy had with Sky News. The face alone tells it. So, the article continues to say, the other choice was for change, represented by the 43-year-old Bobi Wine, the popular name of the pop star turned politician Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu. His campaign braved shootings, continuous intimidation, tear gas, and water cannons, detentions, beatings, and systematic interference in attempts to garner support and deliver a message. There is a clear empirical correlation between the state of democracy in Africa and the prospects for economic growth. This explains why Uganda's authoritarian past has blighted its ability to deliver to its burgeoning numbers of young people. Of course, you know that half our population is below the age of anyway, actually, they go ahead to say that more than 85% of today's 50 million Ugandans are under the age of 25. With the population expected to reach 85 million by year 2050. Yet, the per capita income of Ugandans is less than $990, or just 62% of the African average. The election itself followed a typical authoritarian playbook, with state action against opponents in the run-up to voting, the internet being switched off the previous day, reducing the ability of activists to independently tally votes and report from the more than 50,000 polling stations countrywide, and to expose fraud and violence on social media. As Wine put it, the election was held in the dark. Now, this is powerful, man. It describes exactly what happened. Akugambye nti the election itself followed a typical authoritarian playbook, with the state action against opponents in the run-up to voting, the internet being switched off the previous day, reducing the ability of activists to independently tally votes and report from the more than 50,000 polling stations countrywide, and to expose fraud and violence on social media. As Bobi Wine put it, the election was held in the dark. As if to illustrate this, when tallying got underway, he was placed under house arrest. His electricity was switched off and his house was padlocked. You don't do this as a government if you are secure in your victory. Such tactics were also adopted in the 2021 election, and in the 2016, Museveni's forces simply arrested the challenger, Dr. Kizza Besigye. On the day of the election, he was arrested again in 2024 and is facing ridiculous treason charges before a military court. Now, Bobi Wine is reported as having escaped house arrest and is on the run. The state of international relations offered a repressive tailwind to the Ugandan regime, with the destruction of events from Venezuela to Greenland. Before the election, Museveni even found time to taunt the prowess of the US military. Uganda has long created Western strategic dependencies through Kampala's military involvement in Sudan, Somalia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. African agencies routinely genuflect to closing ranks around incumbents at the expense of African citizens. International organizations may be less callous, but cynically, repeatedly express their concern through a set of well-meaning but hopelessly inadequate statements, ranging from being very concerned to deeply disturbed. The international community has only itself to blame for the popularity of the authoritarian election playbook. In 2016, the Commonwealth Observer team said of Uganda's process that it once again fell short of meeting key democratic benchmarks. The warnings have been consistently there, but have not been a priority for policy makers. And of course, that is it, because just like they put it, this is not the first time this is happening, only that it just gets worse each and every election. Yet democracy has an inestimable value. In my home country of Botswana, democracy has lived up to its promise, with the electoral accountability getting rid of failed leaders when this has been necessary. Not so for Uganda. Instead of working as an agent of renewal and hope, Ugandans have to put up with elections in which Museveni callously clings onto power so as to hand over to his bloodthirsty son, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. Infamous for his tweet storms threatening violence on his father's political opponents, he's also a fan of autocrats at large, tweeting that President Putin does not have to threaten nuclear war. We hear him. An attack on Russia is an attack on Africa. There are two notable election monitoring missions in Uganda, one run by the East African Community, the other by the African Union, in conjunction with other regional bodies. Both have so far been silent. The Commonwealth, of which Uganda is a member, failed this time to send a mission precisely because it knew the election would be contested to the point of violence. Africans and their partners should call out the African Union, its affiliates, and all those African leaders who claim to represent democracy and stand for human rights to pronounce their stance on the violation of the conduct of credible elections. Without more teeth and follow through by international actors, Africans are doomed to be treated as third-class citizens by the ruling elites and their supporters. As the military clamps down on ordinary Ugandans desperate for a political voice and a choice for change, you have been warned of the bloody consequences. Silence translates into complicity in the vote rigging and the brutalization of opponents on the continent as it did with the Tanzanian elections. Such silence only entrenches and fuels dictatorships and the decline in democracy. Nagisembya era nakuterako Serese Khama Ian is the former president of Botswana and a member of the Platform for African Democrats. Now, artisti eyo nayo update njibawadde bulungi nnyo era nga eno ye Platform for African Democrats kosobola okusanga obubaka obw'enjawulo bungi nnyo. Gendayo obeerenga osangayo ne message ya president waffe nga bw'ogirengerawo. Ono ali buli wamu, gwe ky'olina okumanya ali buli wamu. Kitegeera kyobalabanga abakulembeze nga bano ab'ensi ez'enjawulo batunulira ebigenda mu maaso. Kati guno mukutu ne gwerengera aguliko omulengera aguliko olaba kyekyo kiki kyolabaawo. Anyway, eyo update nayo nje bawadde ndowooza katugende ku nsonga ya tugende ku nsonga ya bannakenya bano the Pan-Africans abavuddeyo ne bateekawo ekibuli kyadde ky'amaanyi nnyo. Obubaka bwabwe nabwo bwabadde bulungi. Obubaka bwabwe bwabadde bulungi nnyo nabwagadde nnyo naye nga away from